This is Jamie Dyer welcoming you to another edition of the Quo-Cast. And if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode of the podcast, you can. You can email quocast@outlook.com. That's quocast@outlook.com. Tweet us at the Quo-Cast on Twitter, or X, as it's known these days. Or check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/the Quo-Cast. Don't forget to take a look at our website as well for access to over 5 years of content. I'm celebrating the podcast's 5th anniversary this year. www.thequocast.co.uk. So this is the first in a fairly lengthy series, I'm hoping, celebrating Status Quo's 40th anniversary of the End of the Road tour. Did you go to this tour? Because for many people, they felt it was going to be the last time they ever saw the band. How did you feel when you found out? What was it like going? Do let me know in the comments, on social media, or even on the podcast as well. I shall be talking to a number of people who were there, including the first one here, which is with John Keeling. Thanks for joining us, John Keeling. Never thought I'd say that. I cannot believe it. I must say I'm quite overwhelmed to be talking to you, because I'm a huge fan of the work that you've done with Status Quo over the years. But I've invited you on today to talk about when you attended gigs on the End of the Road tour back in 1984. Sure. Before we get there, how did you discover Status Quo?
I was at a grammar school in Colchester. And I was a mere squirt of about 13 years of age. And I was in metalwork class one day. This is all true, by the way. And the guy along from me was a guy called Galsworthy, who's actually related by some tortuous roots to the artist Galsworthy. Anyway, he's filing a piece of metal down, and he's actually singing Paper Plane. And so it kind of, it stuck in my head. And then I saw them on Top of the Pops. And I don't know what it was, but there was just something about them and something about that kind of like boogie beat thing that I just thought it was fabulous. It really was a kind of revelation. And I suppose I was also, at that time, there was still an awful lot of kind of glam stuff around on Top of the Pops. And Quo looks kind of so hilariously out of place. I love the fact that they were so scruffy and so that's how I kind of discovered the band. And then obviously when I got hold of Pile Driver, I can remember thinking that Oh Baby was just the kind of the greatest thing since sliced bread. I absolutely loved it.
I mean, when was the first time that you saw them live? Would that have been End of the Road?
The first time I saw Status Quo live was 1974. It was the first time they played what was then called the Wembley Empire Pool, with Montrose as a support band, and that was a revelation. That was.
How so? Care to elaborate? Like, what was it?
I bear in mind, I was only a young squirt. I was 14 years old, and I had never experienced anything as intense as that first gig. I can remember before Status Quo came on, around about the time the Montrose were on, there were people downstairs setting fire to their T-shirts. I mean, it was really anarchic, and you know, there were chairs and bits of chairs flying around the place and stuff. I'd just never seen anything like it. It was just a real adrenaline thrill. It was absolutely fabulous and loud.
I mean,
very loud.
It sounds it. It definitely sounds it. Why were they burning the T-shirts? Was that some kind of statement, or was it just because?
Well, I mean, bear in mind, I was up in the gods. and this was happening down on the kind of floor area. So I can't tell you why they were. It was clearly just, as I say, some sort of deranged anarchy. I think that audiences at Status Quo today can't possibly imagine what gigs at that time were like. I mean, you can keep banding around lots of terms, riotous and this, that and the other. It was a really shattering experience. I think the football analogy I kind of get bored of. But the fact of the matter is that Status Quo fans at those gigs were more than fans. They were acolytes. They were part of something that they felt only they understood.
Definitely. How many more times did you see them during the 70s?
I couldn't, be honest with you, without filling out my little old box of ticket stubs and stuff like that, I wouldn't go. I mean, let's put it this way. Every time they toured in the 70s, I used to go and see them. I mean, UK tours, obviously, and things as well like, in fact, the best Status Quo gig I ever went to was when Status Quo played Cardiff Castle with Hawkwind and Budgie and Curved Air and, that kind of setup, John Peel as DJ. That was an absolutely wonderful gig. But I also saw them at the Great British Music Festival at Olympia. But I think the thing is, the difference for me is at that point in time, being a mere teen, that used to get his money from working down at Wimpy Bar on a Saturday, I would only go to one gig on the tour. I didn't do any of this kind of multiple stuff then, which only came later on when I had more money.
Obviously, when you track Status Quo's career on record, it kind of goes into a slightly different direction, whereas with live, it was kind of business as usual, I guess.
Yeah, it's interesting. I obviously I've been, when you kindly said to me, I'll have a word with you about this. I had been thinking about that side of it. And although I know the kind of, it's because it's effectively, that kind of end of the road tour is your primary purpose here. It's funny how I look back at that stuff now and I look at the end of the road videos, which were done so badly, by the way. I mean, the way they were hacked around and messed around by video form, they should have been shot for it. But that aside, when I look at it, I see a band who really, really aren't happy. I mean, I can remember. I'm sorry. I hope I'm not jumping too far ahead.
Not at all.
Something that I remembered because I was thinking carefully about it. On the End of the Road tour, I think I went to see them at Ipswich as well, by the way, on the End of the Road tour, because remarkably they did Ipswich as well as they did a week at Hammersmith Odeon.
Yeah.
And I went to the entire week at Hammersmith Odeon. And it may have been the last but one night, but I think it was probably the last night. I can remember a bizarre scene where, as Status Quo fans, we all know when it comes to Bye Bye Johnny, Bye Bye Johnny ends and that's it. Not so this night. They played Bye Bye Johnny and then there was some kind of faffing around and then they started playing again. Now, I can't remember what they were playing. I mean, I really can't. It might have been Rockin' All Over the World. But they were playing something which eventually kind of collapsed in a heap. And I can remember Francis Rossi looking really out of it. And by that, I mean, he'd imbibed too much of something.
Yeah.
I don't know what. Now, I'll bring that up not to be kind of salacious about it or anything, but it's just that I think there's a lot of Status Quo fans that they look at that end of the road thing with real, perhaps kind of rose-tinted glasses. And I think that, as I say, I don't think I necessarily felt that way. I mean, it was a fabulous thing to be part of. When I was at the gig, that stuff wasn't going through my mind. As I say, I related those comments to the video form videos that came out. They came out in two parts, didn't they? But yeah. I can remember when it first came out, and I was thinking, it's funny. Take away the adrenaline of being at the gig and part of those crowds. I mean, the Milton Keynes experience was extraordinary. In fact, frankly, I probably haven't experienced anything quite like being in that field for that Status Quo gig then. But the band were evidently not in a good place, and they just weren't. I don't think they were as one unit. Anyway, that's my own view.
It's fine. It's fascinating to hear you talk about it, and obviously, you did the 7 nights at Hammersmith, which is pretty much that was over a week.
That was right. It was back to back. There was the Status Quo didn't get a night off or anything like that. Neither the fans. We just went night after night after night after night. I mean, clearly, I wouldn't have done that if I wasn't loving it. 4,500 times by that time had got to an absolutely epic length. I think it was 25, 26 minutes in some instances.
With something like that, yeah, they can't have played it the same every time. It must have been more like a jam session, I guess, with certain markets.
I don't know. I mean, when in the end, because I've listened to quote bootlegs down the years and stuff as well. There is a kind of pattern to what they do. I mean, there is a structure to it. And yeah, sometimes, they'll go on a few more bars going widdly, 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 as Francis would put it. But in truth, you can spot their cues very easily that they rein back in. Of course, though, what I would say is that when they, let's if he overextends a solo or it goes on a bit longer or anything like that, and it felt and sounded different, we all loved that. I certainly did. I mean, I can see why so many fans would like those extended things, because there was an immediacy to it, and there was stuff that happened that would be different. And that's a fabulous thing. That's what makes a live gig, isn't it? I mean, otherwise, you might as well take the album, put it up on the stage and play it loudly.
Exactly. When they announced this tour, it was obviously, billed as like the last one ever, essentially. Do you think that's why you went to so many dates?
Well, of course, yeah. Absolutely no doubt about it. I mean, Quo already by then had been through a bit of tumult. I mean, I don't think anybody was thrilled that John Coughlin had left. People who were real fans, and I was a real fan. So when they were calling that a day, or it looked like they were calling it a day, then obviously I was kind of like, oh my God, I'm going to go. And I was in a situation where, because of the way I was working then and everything, I could afford to go to more, and so I glutted on it. I went to the Crystal Palace gig as well.
And why not?
Absolutely.
Why not? Potentially at that point, I've spoken to people before who've gone, well, they had no idea they were going to come back like a year and a half later.
No, I don't think. I mean, the thing is, when I can remember, and you can see it on that video, there was a part at Milton Keynes. There was a bit where Francis was saying, but we'll still be a band as normal, and it just didn't ring true. Even then, it didn't ring true. And I think that as fans, I mean, those of us who at least were awake when we were watching them on the TV and stuff, the very fact that Alan could kind of drop in and out of the band for various appearances, PR appearances and stuff like that, it was clear to fans who were really following the band, all was not well. And a lot of that all was not well certainly involved Francis and Alan, but it could have involved more. We didn't know as fans, but you could certainly tell that something was awry.
When it came to the last couple of gigs, they almost treated it a bit like a festival, it seems, with a lot of support acts.
Yeah, they were. I mean, who knows? There might have been an element. There might have been an element of thinking, well, we're going to, these are very, very big venues. Lots of people have seen us already. Maybe we need, some extra acts in there. The other side of that is, these were such hugely important gigs that I'll bet you there were people who were very happy about trying to get on the bill. Either way, yeah. For me, I think that funnily enough, the Crystal Palace one, because if I remember rightly, the Crystal Palace one was fairly miserable in terms of the weather. I mean, it rained quite a lot at Crystal Palace. It's one thing I can remember about it. But Phil Lynop's Grand Slam was one of the bands on. They were great. I think Chaz and Dave were on as well.
They were, yeah.
They were fantastic. But is it Little Stephen?
Yes.
Yeah. That was that one seemed terribly incongruous to me. It just wasn't. It wasn't part of the vibe I felt for a Quo gig or a Quo crowd. And I can certainly remember that one particular act. Unfortunately, got lots of bottles and cans, if I remember rightly.
Yes, I believe it happened during the Milton Keynes show as well.
On the Milton Keynes show, I said, the Milton Keynes Bowl can be an absolute killer to drive to and get parked for one of those gigs. I think that I think me and my friends had arrived a bit late. I think for instance, I think we missed Nazareth, which I was very sorry about because I really like Nazareth, and I was very sorry to have missed them. Who else was on? Or wasn't there somebody embarrassing on that we wouldn't talk about now?
Yes.
Yeah, right. Well, I'll tell you what we'll do is we'll skip over that embarrassing figure. Other than that embarrassing figure, who else was on? You'll need to remind me.
Marillion. And,
Marillion. Yeah.
Jason and the Scorchers as well.
Yeah, that's right. I really enjoyed Marillion. I can't remember anything about Jason and the Scorchers, to be honest with you. So they couldn't have done a lot for me, could they?
I mean,
this is going to sound really cheesy. I mean, and I'm sorry if I'm talking a bit freeform with you, but one thing I do remember, this is going to sound so corny and schmaltzy, but it's the truth. When Quo actually finished at Milton Keynes, when they played that last chord and everything like that, I shed a tear. I did. I shed a tear. The band had been a really, really big part of my youth, a huge part of my youth. I learned to play guitar because of them. I got into playing in bands because of them. I mean, all sorts of stuff that I wouldn't have done. And so it was very, it was very, very emotional.
I can well imagine because, like we've already said, you wouldn't have known that they were going to come back like 18 months later. Other than shedding a tear, do you have any other kind of overriding memories of the gig?
You've got to bear in mind, we're talking 40 years ago. Okay.
Yeah.
I think the thing that I can remember, I mean, it sounds rather obvious to say it now and everything, but watching an entire field of people bouncing up and down in unison, not just some kind of, hall like Hammersmith Odeon or something like that, but an entire field with tens of thousands of people all leaping up and down in unison. That was a hell of a sight. And the other thing as well, I mean, the drama of the opening with the helicopters coming in and hearing the radio traffic come over the PA system and everything like that. That was a nice touch. Although the fact of the matter is, I think Quo must have been backstage anyway. But it doesn't really make any difference. It certainly built the drama. But after that, a while ago, I was reading something that dear old Rick had said about that gig, and his comment had been, he said, you play a song and then you thought to yourself, God, it's the last time I'm ever going to do this on stage with this band. And I think at Milton Keynes, it was very much a case of, God, is that the last time I'm going to hear Don't Waste My Time? Which was always one of my favourites. In fact, actually, I think it's the Status Quo Warhorse, that track. And so, yeah, I can remember feeling like that. And of course, you'd eventually, from time to time, you'd get puffed out. And I took in the light show, which was, a lot more bombastic than you would normally associate with Status Quo.
You're listening to the Quo-Cast with me, Jamie Dyer, talking to John Keeling. if you'd like to be a guest on a future episode of the podcast, you can. You can email quocast@outlook.com. That's quocast@outlook.com. You can tweet us on Twitter at the Quo-Cast, or check us out on Facebook, facebook.com/the Quo-Cast. Now, let's get back to the conversation, and after a few deviations, John tells me about the next time he saw the band after the End of the Road tour.
When they came back, as it were, and I was thrilled that they had. I think the first time I saw them was probably with Queen at Wembley Stadium. Right. Because I think that they did a couple of support type things before they did their own tour in the UK. Am I right about that? I think
yes,
I'm right.
They did. Yeah.
And so I when I saw them at that Wembley gig, at the Queen gig, and by the way, I mean, as much as I like Queen and I love Brian May, they're a great band. But my aim going to that gig was to see Status Quo, and I didn't see Queen anyway. And I won't bore you with the story why. But with Status Quo, I thought they looked so much better and so much more like a band that was working together. They were absolutely full of energy. I couldn't believe the pace of their stage performances.
A real difference from a couple of years previously.
Yeah, because a couple of years previously, they were really a bit tired and ploddy. I know that there are going to be other fans listening to this who are going to shoot me because I've said these things. But that's, I can only say, that's the way that it felt. It felt like that to me. And as I say, the revamped Quo. I mean, I think that certainly up through the rest of the 80s and into the early 90s as well, and what have you, they were a supercharged outfit. By then, of course, things like the radio mics for their guitars had given them so much freedom. I can remember Francis would be doing something on it, and he'd run all the way around the back line and wrap round at the other end of the stage and stuff like that. I mean, they were just going bonkers. And now I don't know, once again, whether any of that was chemically induced or not. I mean, some of it might well have been. But the fact of the matter is, there was a new energy and vigour to Status Quo live that I absolutely loved. I think the thing is, though, the recorded output for a while was, I think it would not be unkind to say, for me anyway, I felt patchy, which meant that there was some gems within what they were doing, and there was stuff that didn't feel right. But I can only speak to you as a fan in this instance. These comments have got nothing to do with the work that I did later on with the band, by the way.
Well, no, I was going to ask you sort of as a closing question, because I'd love to talk to you in more detail in the future about the work that you did. But,
sure.
Literally like 20 years on from End of the Road, you're shooting a documentary with them. I mean, what was that like?
That would be, I'm not being evasive here, and I'm not trying to force myself into another show, but there would be a lot to tell you about that, and I can remember it all very, 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 very vividly. It was a really frightening thing to do. I'll tease it that way. It was a really frightening thing to do, because there's always this adage, about don't meet or work with your heroes. In the capacity when you're doing something in a professional capacity, and I was out to make. I wanted to make a really good documentary. I think the bits and pieces I'd seen about the band up until then didn't really impress me very much, and I think showed a misunderstanding of what Status Quo fans wanted out of the portrayal of the band, if you like. And so I was very nervous because I I had to divorce myself from being a fan on the one hand, and yet, of course, what still come out was my enthusiasm about, I'm going to tell you one more tiny little story, and I'm not going to go on about this documentary because we could perhaps do that another time.
Right.
With the other work I've done, but when I was interviewing Rick on his boat, we'd been chatting for a little while, and the tape op, we had to change the cassette, and I'd been talking to him then about. I think the Pile Driver album, and then Hello, and blah blah, this, that, and the other, and so when we paused for this break, he came up to me, and I'll try not to use too bad language, but he said something like, "Ken hell, John, I had no idea you knew so much stuff about the band." He said, "You've got me really worried." and then, bless his heart, he said, "I can't remember half of it." There you are. But as I say, I think that not to try and inveigle my way into another program, but there's such a lot that I could tell you about that experience, and what an extraordinary thing it was to somebody who'd been such a fan. It's a fairy tale, or you could make it up, to be honest with you.
I can well imagine. We mentioned earlier about the End of the Road video and Laserdisc that came out. I mean, obviously, I believe what happened was in the years since, the master tapes are lost or missing or something. Something's happened in the meantime. But do you think perhaps that's for the best that we kind of leave it back there, or do you think perhaps at some point they should have re-released it?
I think when I started to go and do a bit of kind of footage research and stuff for the documentary I was making, eventually, it's shocking really how stuff isn't looked after, isn't taken care of properly. And that's not pointing fingers at any one particular individual. You're talking about tapes and stuff like that. We live in a digital world now where stuff kind of gets recorded and it exists, until doomsday. I think the great shame is that, first of all, video form, I think it was a really greedy thing to do. To basically stagger the release in two bits, VHS 1 and now VHS 2. At the very least, they should have come out with, none of us would have minded paying the money. There should have been a twin pack, faithful representation of that day. Not, oh dearie me, we don't want any more of this kind of 4,500 times track for whatever reason, because somebody somewhere doesn't like it, or it might go over the running time for the duplication plant and the tape stock. I think we were all very poorly served, and I think the band were poorly served as well. Sorry, I know it might sound a bit pompous of me to say that, but the fact of the matter is, I could have made a much better job. And so could Andy, who's subsequently filmed them, loads of times live himself as well. I mean, obviously, you can't blame effectively blame the producer of it. I mean, the producer would have been given a bunch of money and told, right, you've got to cut it this way, and and it's got to be sent out like this. Or the other thing you could have done, if you wanted to be kind of a complete breadhead about it, you could have done it their way and gone, right, oh, look, let's sell lots of number 1. Now let's sell lots of number 2. Now, guess what? Along comes the digipack with it all in the correct order. Thank you very much as number 3, on VHS, as it were. That could have been done that way. But instead, what happened, I felt, was very disappointing, because and whatever comments I might have made about the way I think that the band looked kind of retrospectively, it was an awesome moment in rock and roll history. It really was. And everybody involved deserved better than what that video distributor did.
Yes, I agree with you there. Thank you so much for talking to me today, John. Thanks for being on the podcast.
No, look, first of all, thank you very much. And also thank you very much for the kind comments that you used introducing me. It's much appreciated.